Today, we're going to learn how to develop a rubric. Before we get started, let's review some of the tools you'll need to develop a strong methodology and determine what you need your rubric to measure. The first two items you need in your toolbox are your curriculum and your program's learning outcomes. Next, you'll need your mapping. Mapping demonstrates where your curriculum and learning outcomes align. The next tool you'll need is your rubric. Scoring a student assignment on a rubric gives you what is called direct evidence. After you collect your direct evidence, you will want to collect some indirect evidence to help explain your results. The most common types of indirect evidence are surveys, focus groups, and reflective essays. You'll want to make sure that your indirect evidence directly relates to the PLO you are reviewing. Let's look at how to decide on categories and dimensions for your rubric. First, you'll need to think through your learning outcomes and how they can be measured. Next, you will need to decide what scale to use. OIE recommends a 5-level rubric with the highest level describing the caliber of work of an expert, and the lowest level being information not present. We'll look closely at this scale soon. You will then need to choose dimensions for your rubric. These are the topics or elements that you want to review. For example, if your PLO relates to problem solving, you may want a dimension to review how well students define the problem, and another dimension to review how well they identify strategies to solve the problem, and another dimension to review how well they implement the strategies, and so on. Next, you will need to describe the characteristics of the caliber of work that would earn each level. What would it look like for an expert in the field to define a problem? Since students are not yet experts, what do you expect their work to look like? We will look at writing descriptions in depth soon, but keep in mind that these descriptions should be fairly specific. A few tips to keep in mind while writing criteria are to try to make each category or level more rigorous than the one before, but also to try to make the jumps between each level in the progression equal. Use Bloom's taxonomy to help find the right descriptors for each level. And lastly, after you create your rubric, you'll need to test it out on a student assignment. Once you try it, you may find minor changes that need to be made. Now, we're ready to create our rubric. OIE has created a rubric template for you. Let's start by downloading this template. Go to pepperdine.edu/OIE. On the landing page, scroll down to click on Assessment. Then find the Assessment Resources page. Then, listed under Rubrics, click on the Benchmark Rubric template. It will automatically download to your computer. For this example, I'm only going to have 2 dimensions, so I'll just go ahead and get rid of the spaces for dimensions 3 and 4. Your rubric can have as few or as many dimensions as you need it to have. As you can see here, we have our 5-level rating scale. At the lowest level, we have information not present. If a student scores here, it could be because the student just didn't include the information requested for that dimension. Or, if you find that many students are scoring here, there could be an inconsistency with what the rubric is measuring and what the assignment asks students to include. Let's look next at the 3rd level. This is our benchmark. It is very important to have a designated benchmark on your rubric. This is the level where you expect the majority of your students to score. As you can see, level 2 is below expectation, and the 3rd level, outstanding, is essentially above expectation, but still not quite at a professional level. You can expect most of your students will score in these 3 levels. You may have an occasional outlier that doesn't include some information, or maybe you have a really exceptional student that is already putting out professional level work. But typically, you should see students fall between outstanding and below expectation. Now, we need to add our dimensions. For this example, we're going to create a rubric to measure critical thinking. I've already written out what I want my 2 dimensions to be, so I'll add those here. First is explanation of issues. I'll just fix my formatting so it looks how I want it. and the second dimension is evidence. You can see that I've added a further description of what I mean by the dimension titles. So Dimension 1, Explanation of Issues. Students will consider issues or problems critically and ensure they are stated clearly and well defined. We find it is usually easiest to start at the benchmark level. What caliber of work do you expect to see your students producing? I'm just going to add my description here. But reading through it again, I expect most students to be performing at a higher level than this, so I'll add in an adjective here to elevate my criteria. Now that I know what I'm expecting, it should be simple to describe what does not meet my expectations. We'll look more closely at the differences here at the end. Next, I want to add what outstanding work would look like. I'm going to take the first part of my expectation and elevate it to a level some students might reach, but most probably won't. Now, I'm going to add the rest of my description here. Again, we'll look more closely at the differences at the end, but you can see that I've just elevated the criteria from clear understanding to advanced understanding. Now I'll do the same to create my expert level. So I'll just make an addition to elevate this criteria. You can also see at the bottom of this description that I'm now looking for full understanding over just advanced understanding. A tip at the expert level is to remember that you are an expert in your field. So think about the specifics of the caliber of work you expect yourself to create. Now for the final criteria, we can simply just put information not present. Let's take a closer look at the progression of a couple of points in our levels. Below expectation, we have student generally states and explains the issues. Our expectation is that students will specifically state and explain the issues. To score outstanding, students must convincingly identify and explain the issues. And to be in an expert level, we expect that students will assert and describe the issues. You'll see that next, to be below expectation, students will only show somewhat to no relevant information. Our expectation is that students will present highly relevant information. Above our expectation is that students will exemplify most relevant information, and experts will deliver all relevant information. Remember, the goal is to make the jump between each level as equal as possible. Now I'll show you the complete rubric with the descriptions added for Dimension 2. And that's our critical thinking rubric. Now we're ready to test it on an assignment, make any necessary changes we may find, and then start using it to collect our direct evidence. Remember, OIE has a lot of resources to help you create your rubrics and other necessary tools. You can always check out the bank of example rubrics on OIE's website. You're free to use those rubrics as they are, or edit them to better fit your PLO. If you're in need of a more specific rubric versus the more general ones like critical thinking and problem solving, another good tip is to simply Google the type of rubric you're looking for. All accredited universities are conducting assessment, and many schools are open to sharing their tools and resources. And as always, please feel free to reach out with any questions, or to have your rubric reviewed for feedback. OIE is here to help.